Jerome Powell held his final press conference as Fed chair this Wednesday. The Fed met, they held rates steady, again, for the third consecutive meeting. I think everybody was pretty much expecting that, but what they weren't expecting was what would happen around that decision. There was a 4-person dissent, which really, we haven't seen a split of that magnitude since October of 1992. Oh, and Powell announcing that he is staying on the Board of Governors indefinitely. And, this also happened, incoming chair Kevin Warsh quietly signaling that he intends to rewrite the rules on how we even measure inflation. For boring economic news, this week was pretty reality TV-esque. This was all pretty wild. And of course, all of it matters for your real estate strategy. Okay, so for an exit interview, this one was a little weird. Wednesday's meeting was Jerome Powell's final one, but not because he's going to jail for overspending on the Fed building remodel, not even because he's been a bad Fed chair. His term just ends on May 15th. That's why. It was his last presser and his last meeting. But it seems he won't be going anywhere quietly. Powell announced he will remain on the Fed's Board of Governors, citing what he called unprecedented legal attacks on the central bank's political independence by the Trump administration. His exact words: "My concern is really about the series of legal attacks which threaten our ability to conduct monetary policy without considering political factors." Not to get too political myself here, but it seems like a fair concern to consider whether or not we as a country really do want the central bank to remain politically neutral. Not my topic for today. I have already covered that in the past. Let's talk about this. His decision to stay denies President Trump an immediate opportunity to appoint a new governor to the central bank's 7-member board. So he's making something pretty clear. He believes the Fed's independence is worth fighting for, even from inside that brand new building, even as a former chair. His final words before leaving the podium were, "Thank you very much, everyone. I won't be seeing you next time." And then he dramatically removed his glasses, placed them in his suit pocket, and slowly walked out. There was a brief applause from reporters. It felt like a moment of sorts. 8 years this guy served. 15 rate hikes, 11 rate cuts, 2 emergency pandemic meetings, and an exit that looked more like a constitutional standoff than retirement. Whatever you think of Jerome Powell's tenure, that last press conference was unusual. The 8-4 vote is also unusual. The last time 4 FOMC members dissented was October of 1992. That got my attention as mortgage bonds blasted into the red that afternoon. The split went like this. Fed Governor Stephen Moran wanted to cut rates by 1/4 of a point. No news there. We expected that from him. Cleveland Fed President Beth Hammack, Minneapolis Fed President Neil Kashkari, and Dallas Fed President Lori Logan voted to hold. But this is the interesting part. They dissented because they didn't support the statements, easing bias. That last part is the important one because 3 dissenters weren't saying the economy is fine and we should hold forever. They were objecting to the Fed's language, specifically a phrase that implied that the next move would likely be a cut. That statement included the word additional in reference to future rate adjustments, implying further rates are coming. 3 officials didn't want to promise that, given where inflation is right now. Translation: the Fed is not just divided on what to do, they're equally divided on what to say. And in today's world, where stories often matter more than math actually does, what you say is almost more important than what you do. Even though the Fed's dot plot still technically shows 1 cut penciled in this year, markets are now pricing in no rate cuts for the rest of this year and well into next. If that holds, buyers and sellers have to stop waiting for rate relief, right? Because it's not going to save them, and they have to start working with this market we already have. The crazy thing is, as upset as we all are about what happened with mortgage interest rates over the past month, we're still right around 6%, which I'll remind you is exactly where economists had predicted we would be all this year, even before the war started. Now let's pivot and talk about Kevin Warsh's new inflation rules. If you work with buyers or sellers, or if you are a buyer or potential seller, Watching interest rates, the next part will be especially interesting. Kevin Warsh, Trump's nominee to replace Powell, passed out of the Senate Banking Committee on a party line vote Wednesday morning. His full Senate confirmation is expected soon. And when he takes the chair, he has already telegraphed to everyone that he intends to change how the Fed measures inflation. This is interesting. Right now, the Fed's preferred inflation gauge is called PCE, the core PCE, Personal Consumption Expenditures Index. But the core excludes food and energy. It has been the standard for decades. Warsh wants to go further by stripping out extreme price shocks when calculating overall inflation. His words at the Senate hearing: "What I'm most interested in is what is the underlying inflation rate, not what's the one-time change in prices because of a change in geopolitics or a change in beef." In other words, strip out the war, strip out the oil spike, strip out the beef prices. Show me what inflation looks like underneath all of that. Basically, the exact opposite of supply chain management and logic, but what do I know? My degrees are in broadcast journalism and psychology. On the surface, it does sound reasonable. It might be reasonable, but here's the catch that Bank of America's economists flagged immediately. By trimming only the most extreme readings, some more minor spikes, perhaps caused by food or energy prices, could actually creep into the inflation reading and cause it to be higher than the Fed's current preferred view. A trimmed median inflation gauge tracked by Bank of America was actually higher than the core PCE in both 2019 and 2020. That means Warsh's new measuring stick could show more inflation, not less, which would mean higher rates for longer. Oh shit, is that a Powell line? The exact opposite of what Trump has been publicly demanding. If inflation reaccelerates under Warsh's framework, he may find himself compelled to raise interest rates, doing precisely the opposite of what the president who nominated him had in mind. Nobody's talking about that, though. Then, PCE numbers dropped yesterday. This is all theoretical. Everything I've been saying is theoretical until you look at the actual data, which we got some of yesterday. The core PCE price index, yes, that same preferred Fed measure that I was just discussing, accelerated a seasonally adjusted 0.3% for the month of March, pushing the 12-month inflation rate to 3.2%. Headline prices rose 0.7%, putting the annual level at 3.5%. All readings came in line with consensus, meaning they were what was expected, but definitely not in line with that 2% target, not even close to the 2% target. And the headline number, the one that includes food and energy, the one that captures what you actually feel at the gas pump and grocery store, that one came in at 3.5% annually. One economist described it this way: this is a split screen economy. Companies and investors involved in AI are on fire. Meanwhile, middle and moderate income households are struggling with high gas prices and inflation that's back at its hottest level in 3 years. Hottest level in 3 years. That split screen economy is remarkably similar to what I've been describing in the housing market, isn't it? For weeks. It's like the macro confirmation of what buyers and sellers in Reno are already feeling in their bones. Here's why this matters for housing more specifically. The Fed cannot cut rates when core inflation is running at 3.2% and headline inflation is running at 3.5%. Full stop. Even if Warsh rewrites the whole measuring framework, changes all the rules, even if you strip out oil and energy, inflation is still above target by any honest read. The war tax is now showing up in official numbers, not just in consumer sentiment. What this means for buyers and sellers right now? Let me bring this all the way home. The Fed held, Powell is staying, but leaving his chair position. Warsh is coming in with a new framework nobody fully understands yet. Inflation just printed above target, and markets are pricing in no rate cuts for the rest of 2026 and well into 2027. If you have been waiting for interest rates to drop before you take action, that signal is not coming anytime soon. Buyers have to learn to read a market that is more fragmented, more localized, and more psychology-driven than ever before. The confidence tax is real, my friends. The war tax is also real. And both of them are showing up in your neighborhood. And sometimes in really different ways, even on the same street. Every house is still its own market. The macro data tells us about the environment. It doesn't tell us a strategy to use within that environment. That part still requires a local, active expert.